Let's begin with a structural overview. Welcome to another lecture. Today we take up Bosnia and Herzegovina, a small yet historically resonant country at the hinge of Central Europe and the Mediterranean. I am Alexei, and with me is Priyanka. It's important to understand at the outset that Bosnia and Herzegovina's story is one of crossings, of empires, of rivers, of identities. And the traces of those crossings are written into its institutions today.
Hi, I'm Priyanka. Thank you for listening, and we're excited to dive into this. A lot of people know the name, but not the structure underneath it. So let's unpack that together.
To frame our discussion, in lay terms, Bosnia and Herzegovina is a Southeast European country on the Balkan Peninsula, with about 3.4 million inhabitants, Sarajevo as the capital, and surprisingly to some, a short Adriatic coastline around the town of Neum. It is mountainous, with the Dinaric Alps running like a spine, which historically made travel slow, politics local, and identities layered. Yet those same mountains protected communities and cultures that intermingled in valleys and river towns. Scientifically speaking, we examine a geopolitical frontier space repeatedly reorganized by imperial systems. Medieval Bosnia developed as a banate, that is to say, a polity ruled by a ban. It later became a kingdom in 1377 under Tvrtko I. Under the Ottomans after 1463, Bosnia was structured as an eyalet and then a vilayet, subdivided into sanjaks. These were standardized administrative units with fiscal and legal implications. Habsburg occupation from 1878 and annexation in 1908 introduced modernizing codifications, censuses, and railways. The current state architecture, born of the 1995 Dayton Agreement, is a deliberately decentralized power-sharing system with two entities, the Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Republika Srpska, plus the Brčko district, and a three-member rotating presidency representing Bosniak, Serb, and Croat constituencies.
Maybe the best place to begin is by asking a simple question. Where do the names come from? And why is it Bosnia and Herzegovina together rather than, separate states or just one name?
To answer that, etymologically, Bosnia most plausibly derives from the Bosna River. As Anton Meyer suggested, there may be an Illyrian hydronym from a Proto-Indo-European root meaning running water, which is nicely literal. The earliest widely accepted reference to Bosona appears in the 10th century Byzantine text we know as De Administrando Imperio. As for Herzegovina, the name means the Duke's land, from the German Herzog, crystallized when Stjepan Vukčić Kosača styled himself Herceg of Hum and the Coast in 1448. Ottoman administrators subsequently institutionalized the term in Sanjak and later eyalet names. Pairing Bosnia and Herzegovina reflects the historical amalgam of regions that, despite administrative oscillations, tended to be governed together.
So moving on. Why does any of this matter right now? Beyond maps and names, what are the stakes today?
Modern relevance centers on European integration and domestic governance. Bosnia and Herzegovina received European Union candidate status in December 2022. It has engaged with NATO through the Membership Action Plan since 2010. Progress depends on rule of law, electoral and constitutional reforms, public administration coherence, and economic modernization. Equally, it is crucial to understand how historical misunderstandings continue to circulate. For example, debates over whether a 10th century mention implies fixed medieval ethno-political identities. Philological ambiguities in Byzantine texts should not be weaponized in contemporary politics. In simpler terms, getting the past right lowers the temperature of the present.
That makes sense. And when people think about Bosnia and Herzegovina, a couple of basic facts jump out, right?
Indeed. First, geography. Bosnia is largely continental and mountainous. Herzegovina, by contrast, exhibits a Mediterranean climate with karst landscapes and vineyards. Second, history in brief. The Ottoman conquest in 1463 integrated Bosnia as an Ottoman province, inaugurating centuries of legal and demographic change. Habsburg administration arrived in 1878. Annexation in 1908 precipitated a diplomatic crisis, and in 1914, Sarajevo was the stage for Gavrilo Princip's assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, an act that, as we observe, triggered alliance dynamics that became the First World War. In the 20th century, Bosnia endured genocidal violence under the Axis-aligned independent state of Croatia, witnessed a multi-ethnic partisan resistance that re-established it as a Yugoslav republic in 1943, industrialized under socialism, hosted the 1984 Winter Olympics, and then suffered the 1992 to 1995 war, including the Srebrenica genocide, before peace was secured at Dayton.
And the surprising details: the coastline at Neuem and Sarajevo's Olympic legacy, which a lot of listeners may remember from photos of the torch and the ski jumps.
Quite so. The roughly 20-kilometer Adriatic window at Neum is easy to overlook on a crowded European coastline. And Sarajevo's 1984 Olympics, long before many of our students were born, left facilities that later bore the scars of siege. The juxtaposition is poignant. Demographically, we note a composition of chiefly Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats, alongside recognized minorities, and a significant diaspora whose remittances and networks matter for the economy. Governance today remains highly decentralized, with a bicameral parliamentary assembly, a three-member presidency, and the Brčko district's special status to keep vital corridors intact. If I may add a personal note before we enter the analytical core. As a young student, I watched the Sarajevo Olympics on a flickering television, fascinated that winter sport and Ottoman architecture could share a valley. Years later, reading Evliya Çelebi's 17th century descriptions of the same city, we can infer a remarkable continuity of urban life across empires. History, like chess, is about position and tempo. Bosnia's position is fixed by mountains and rivers, but its tempo has been set by the empires that moved through.
I've been wondering about this first big question. What exactly did the Ottoman centuries do to Bosnia and Herzegovina, beyond adding mosques and markets? What changed structurally?
The Ottoman impact was systemic. Administratively, Bosnia became an eyalet with sanjaks and timar land grants that tied military obligation to revenue, embedding the province in a fiscal military machine. Legally, the millet framework allowed religious communities internal jurisdiction in personal status matters, which in practice produced plural legal orders layered atop Sharia and imperial codes. Demographically, and this is surprising to many European audiences, local conversion to Islam over the 16th and early 17th centuries created a Slavic-speaking Muslim majority. Pieter Mazreku's 1624 report, while not a modern census, is broadly consistent with this trend. Sociologically, this opened avenues into imperial service. Bosnians rose to high office, Sokolu Mehmed Pasha among the Grand Viziers, and endowed cities with Waqf institutions. Gazi Husrev Beg's complex in Sarajevo is paradigmatic.
I'm curious about the local Muslim majority. Why does that matter politically later? Is it just a religious statistic, or did it shape the way nationalism developed in the region?
It mattered profoundly. First, it made Bosnia distinctive among European provinces by creating a Muslim urban middle class and elite without large-scale external colonization. This altered class structures, patterns of patronage, and urban culture. Second, when 19th century national movements articulated identities through confessional lines, Bosnia did not map neatly onto neighboring nationalisms. Habsburg administrators, aware of competing Serbian and Croatian claims, attempted to cultivate a supra-ethnic Bosnian category, Bošnjaci in an imperial civic sense, as a stabilizing move. Third, in the 20th century, the memory of Ottoman-era protections and later losses, including agrarian reforms that dispossessed many Muslim landholders in the interwar period, fed political mobilization and insecurity. In conclusion, religious demography here is not merely descriptive. It is constitutive of political possibility and constraint.
Building on that, did the Ottoman period also set up later frontier dynamics with Austria, for example, after the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699?
Precisely. After 1699, Bosnia became the empire's exposed western wall. Renewed frontier status meant militarization, population movements, and episodic revolt. Ottoman policies also favored Orthodox settlement and church building in places where medieval Orthodox institutions had been weak, further diversifying the confessional map. The cumulative effect was a province accustomed to managing difference via layered institutions. That legacy complicates but also informs today's power-sharing arrangements.
To shift gears a bit, what if Austria-Hungary had not annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908? Do we get a very different 20th century? Or just a different timeline to similar outcomes?
Counterfactuals, handled carefully, can illuminate structure. Without the 1908 annexation, several plausible paths exist. 1. Prolonged Habsburg occupation without formal annexation, while the Ottoman state continued its late reform spasms. Bosnia would remain a juridical Ottoman province under de facto Habsburg administration, preserving a diplomatic ambiguity, but not altering governance on the ground much. 2. Internationalization or condominium-style arrangements under great power oversight, a solution occasionally floated in contemporary diplomacy. 3. In the turbulence after the 1908 Young Turk Revolution and the 1912–1913 Balkan Wars, Bosnia might have been contested by neighboring states, risking partition and earlier interethnic friction.
So, what comes to mind next is the Sarajevo assassination. If annexation had not happened, do we still get that event? And does World War I still ignite in 1914?
We must separate trigger from causes. Princip's target was a Habsburg heir touring a formally annexed province. Without annexation, his particular grievance architecture changes, and he may not have had that opportunity in that form. Yet European great power rivalry, alliance commitments, and the shock of the Balkan Wars had primed the system to combust. We can infer that a continental war remained probable, though the spark might have occurred elsewhere or later. An altered timeline might have affected mobilization schedules, diplomatic sequencing, and even the extent of territorial war aims. Domestically, no annexation could have delayed the 1910 Bosnian Constitution in Sabor. Habsburg modernization, rail networks, cadastral surveys might have proceeded more tentatively under legal ambiguity, which in turn could have shaped nationalist politics differently. In simpler terms, the river would still likely have reached the sea, but its meanders might have shifted.
And economically, maybe fewer Habsburg-era factories or legal codifications in that window. Then again, After 1918, new structures arrive with the kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes anyway. It's a moving target.
Exactly. Path dependence is powerful, but so is institutional replacement after regime change. The counterfactual is instructive less for a definitive answer than for reminding us how annexation crystallized grievances and accelerated timings already latent in the system.
On to our next point, the future. Bosnia and Herzegovina is now an EU candidate. What are the realistic prospects and hurdles over, say, the next decade?
The prospects hinge on aligning a Dayton-era constitutional structure with acquis communautaire demands for functional governance. Challenges include electoral law disputes, entity vetoes that can paralyze state-level decision-making, judicial independence, anti-corruption enforcement, and public administration reform to reduce fragmentation across state, entity, canton, and municipal layers. Economically, unemployment, brain drain, and uneven privatization legacies persist, though tourism, information technology, and renewables show potential. Diaspora remittances continue to stabilize households. Security cooperation via NATO's framework and resolution of defense property questions remain relevant, as does demining and civil protection interoperability. International oversight through the Office of the High Representative still exists as a backstop, but the long-term goal is a self-sustaining constitutional order.
Can we maybe now look at political stability? How central is it for accession? And do issue-based, cross-ethnic protests, like those in 2014, suggest an alternative politics that could help unlock reforms?
Stability is necessary, but on its own insufficient. The EU prizes credible reforms with implementation. The 2014 protests, driven by jobs, failed privatizations, and governance frustrations, were important because they briefly reframe politics around performance rather than ethnicity. If such civic energies can be channeled into institutional change, transparent procurement, digitalized services, merit hiring, they could lower the transaction costs of governing a complex federation and meet EU benchmarks more efficiently. It is worth noting, though, that electoral engineering and constitutional revision in a post-conflict consociational system is delicate. Research on power sharing, minority safeguards, and judicial arbitration in places like the Brčko district offers promising micro-level templates. Further empirical study on anti-corruption sequencing and administrative consolidation in the Western Balkans would be particularly valuable.
Maybe it's just me, but the Brčko example feels like a small lab for bigger changes. You keep a corridor open, and you also keep options open for how institutions can evolve pragmatically.
Precisely, a corridor in geography and a corridor in constitutional imagination. In conclusion, Bosnia and Herzegovina's European path will be incremental, but the combination of civic pressure, targeted reforms, and credible external incentives has moved mountains before, even in the Dinaric Alps.
So, I guess that kind of sums it up. A country with complex roots, layered identities, and a political system designed to keep peace while it figures out how to move forward.
To summarize, we traced the name and geography. We examined Ottoman legacies that shaped demography and law. We considered the 1908 annexation's counterfactuals, and we outlined the contemporary EU horizon within Dayton's architecture. For those who wish to read further, Ottoman provincial histories in the Balkans offer a comparative lens that repays the effort. This then completes our present analysis. Be well, and until next time.